Maria Theresa's 16 children. The sons. Maria Theresa was one of the most powerful women in history. Her husband and son got to hold the title of emperor, but she was the real power. She reformed and modernized her empire, all while giving birth to 16 children, 5 of whom were sons. Despite their mother's power, the boys were favored over their sisters and educated to be leaders. 2 were Holy Roman emperors and shared the ideals of enlightened reform, though with differing amounts of success. One held a lifelong grudge against his elder brother, and one was Beethoven's first patron. Here are the stories of the 5 sons of Maria Theresa. Joseph was his parents' 4th child and long-awaited male heir. His arrival was met with great rejoicing, even though it coincided with the beginning of the War of Austrian Succession. He was a bright young man and received an Enlightenment education, heavy in the works of Voltaire, and was given the practical political training his mother had been denied. Maria Theresa's great rival, King Frederick II of Prussia, was set out as an excellent example for him. At 19, he was married to the beautiful Princess Isabella of Parma. He loved her dearly, finding her both intellectually stimulating and charming. Isabella, however, was more enamored of his sister, Maria Christina, and it was rumored that the 2 young women were lovers. Isabella was fond of Joseph, but she lived in mortal terror of becoming pregnant and dying in childbirth as her mother had, so she often avoided her husband's affection. The couple had 1 child, a daughter named Maria Theresa after her grandmother. Isabella suffered postpartum depression after the birth, which was exacerbated by a quick succession of 2 miscarriages and another pregnancy. 6 months pregnant, Isabella contracted smallpox and went into labor prematurely. The child died shortly after birth, and Isabella, grief-stricken, followed her a few days later. Joseph was heartbroken. He devoted himself to his surviving daughter and refused to consider remarrying. In 1765, his father died, and Joseph became emperor and his mother's co-ruler. He and his mother had differing opinions on many subjects. Joseph wanted to promote religious tolerance, relieve the peasantry of feudal burdens, remove restrictions on trade and knowledge, and liberate the serfs. But his mother always had the final say, and Joseph felt stifled and frequently threatened to abdicate. One thing about which mother and son did agree was their own despotic right to rule. In 1769, he met with his mother's rival and his own role model, Frederick the Great of Prussia. The 2 rulers got on well and began discussing slicing up Poland between them. Under political pressure, Joseph married his second cousin, Princess Maria Joseph of Bavaria. Maria Joseph admired her husband but felt intimidated by his intellect. He treated her coldly and avoided her as much as possible. 2 years into their unhappy marriage, Maria Josepha fell ill with smallpox, and Joseph did not visit her on her deathbed, though he later regretted his callousness. Joseph never remarried. Joseph's only surviving child, Maria Theresa, died of lung disease at the age of 7. The emperor was traumatized by her death and never recovered. In 1775, Frederick the Great fell ill, and Joseph assembled an army to march on Silesia, a long-disputed territory. But Frederick recovered, and Joseph was forced to back down. In 1777, he paid a visit to his sister, Marie Antoinette, now Queen of France. He was able to talk to King Louis XVI and get to the bottom of why he and his bride had still not consummated their marriage after 7 years. Armed with his brother-in-law's advice, Louis soon deflowered Marie, and she gave birth to a daughter the following year. Based on his observations in France, Joseph predicted that a revolution might be coming soon. In 1780, Empress Maria Theresa died, and Joseph finally held the reins of power alone. He asked his unmarried sisters to leave court as he shunned the presence of women and wanted to end what he called their women's republic. He moved quickly in pursuit of his own goals of enlightened despotism. He wanted to be a benevolent father to his people and to make them happy. but only in strict accordance with his own ideas of what was best for them, which didn't always fit the reality of his people's lives. He granted limited freedom of religion, secularized church land, made use of the German language compulsory, and abolished the death penalty and serfdom. He decreed that peasants must be paid in cash rather than labor obligations, but this policy was violently opposed by the nobility and the peasants as their barter economy lacked money. The people grew indignant at the emperor and his secret police interfering with nearly every aspect of their lives. Hungarians in particular were infuriated, and rebellion broke out there, in the Austrian Netherlands, and in other territories. At 46, Joseph was worn down from fighting losing battles and was abandoned by his followers. His chief minister refused to visit him for 2 years, and his brother and heir Leopold refused his offer of co-rulership and remained in Florence. At last, Joseph recognized that his servants could not or would not carry out his plans. With the empire near collapse, he was forced to back down on many of his reforms. He died in 1790 at the age of 48. His epitaph reads, "Here lies Joseph II, who failed in all he undertook." Charles Joseph was the second and favored son of his mother and father. He had a deep rivalry and hatred of his older brother Joseph. He ridiculed Joseph for his haughtiness and thought himself to be more deserving of the imperial crown because he had been born to his mother after she became empress. He often said that when the time came, he meant to contend with his brother over the empire. The rivalry between the brothers was brought to an end when Charles Joseph died of smallpox 2 weeks shy of his 16th birthday. While his mother sat at his bedside in tears, her beloved son told her, "You should not weep for me, dear mother, for if I lived, I would have brought you many more tears." You have to wonder how history might have been different if there had been an Emperor Charles Joseph instead. Leopold, as the third son, was not expected to inherit much and was trained from an early age for the priesthood. But when his elder brother Charles Joseph died at 15, plans were changed. Leopold would inherit his father's Grand Duchy of Tuscany. At 17, he was married to Infanta Maria Luisa of Spain, daughter of King Charles III. His father died while the family was traveling to attend his wedding, so he and his new bride traveled to Florence to take their place as Grand Duke and Duchess. Leopold's father, Emperor Francis Stephen, had been granted Tuscany after the Medici family, who had ruled there for nearly 2 centuries, died out. Francis Stephen had been more concerned with politics in the Holy Roman Empire and had done little in Tuscany other than tax it heavily. For the first 5 years of his reign, young Leopold held only nominal authority under the supervision of counselors appointed by his mother. But at 22, he returned to Vienna to ask the Empress to remove the counselors. Once he held real power in Tuscany, Leopold set about lowering taxes and removing many restrictions on industry and personal freedom, which had been in place since the rule of the Medicis. As he had no standing army to pay for, he was able to reinvest in the state and funded several profitable public works. He was the first ruler in modern history to outlaw the death penalty. He promoted medical education, smallpox inoculation, built new hospitals, and reformed the inhumane system of care for the mentally ill. Despite bringing Tuscany to prosperity, Leopold's cold manner made him unpopular with his people. It was said that his heart was made of brains. He was also notorious for his many extramarital affairs. His most famous mistresses were Lady Anna Gore Cowper and ballerina Livia Raimondi, with whom he fathered a son and granted a palace. Leopold's wife, Maria Luisa, was a cheerful and good-natured woman and had been raised to endure any hardship of marriage without complaint. She turned a blind eye on her husband's many dalliances, all while giving birth to 16 children, making Leopold the founder of the new Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty. Leopold had respect for the rights of citizens and desired harmony between the populace and the government. He was interested in the creation of a constitution as the new government of the United States of America was enacting. This was a radical idea at the time and met with opposition even from those who would have benefited. However, his constitutional plans did not come to pass as he inherited the Holy Roman Empire from his brother and was called away to Vienna in 1790. The brothers Joseph and Leopold had always been close. Like Joseph, Leopold was an enlightened despot, but his efforts on the smaller stage of Tuscany were better considered and much more successful. In the final years of Joseph's life, Leopold observed the many missteps and overly radical and authoritarian edicts his brother was enacting and distanced himself from them. Feeling his death approaching, Joseph begged his brother and heir to return to Vienna as co-ruler, but Leopold felt it prudent to avoid getting tangled up in his brother's policies and remained in Florence. After Joseph died, Leopold returned to Vienna as emperor and immediately began making concessions to Joseph's reforms, pacifying the many groups who were near revolution. One of his more radical steps was to remove the freedom granted by his brother to thousands of serfs. Despite smoothing over many problems within the empire, Leopold faced external threats on all sides. He wanted to send troops west to support his sister, Queen Marie Antoinette of France, who had been arrested amid the French Revolution. But he knew that Catherine the Great of Russia was waiting on the eastern border, ready to attack. Instead, he supported a rescue attempt. The French royals tried to flee in a carriage, but King Louis of France was recognized and arrested only a few miles from the border. The new French revolutionary government posed an increasing threat to the empire, and Leopold attempted to enlist the aid of Britain and Russia against France, but was unsuccessful. In 1792, Emperor Leopold died suddenly and unexpectedly at the age of 44. It was rumored that he may have been poisoned by one of his many enemies at home and abroad. Though he had only been emperor for 2 years, his rule was highly regarded, especially in comparison to his older brother Joseph. He was succeeded as emperor by his son, Francis II. Ferdinand, the fourth son, was engaged at 9 to the 13-year-old Maria Beatrice d'Este, the only living child of Duke Ercole III of Modena. Ferdinand thus became the heir to the Duchy of Modena. At 17, he married Maria Beatrice. Festivities for their wedding included Mozart's opera, Ascanio in Alba. While his father-in-law was still alive, Ferdinand was granted the governorship of Milan, and he moved there with his new bride. The couple had 10 children. In 1796, Napoleon invaded Milan and forced the family to flee. A year later, a treaty between France and Austria granted Duke Ercole the Duchy of Breisgau in southern Germany. In 1803, the 75-year-old Duke Ercole died, and Ferdinand succeeded him as Duke of Breisgau and Duke of Modena, in name only. 2 years later, yet another treaty between Napoleon and the Holy Roman Empire forced Ferdinand to give up Breisgau. He died the following year at 52. 8 years later, his son, Francis IV, was recognized as Duke of Modena by the Congress of Vienna. Maximilian Francis was Maria Theresa's 16th and last child. At 24, he succeeded his uncle, Prince Charles Alexander of Lorraine, as Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights, an order which had been established in 1192 to protect pilgrims on the way to the Holy Land. At 28, he became Archbishop and Elector of Cologne. In this position, he set up court in Bonn. He was a lover and patron of music. He maintained a musical establishment in which Ludwig von Beethoven's grandfather was choirmaster and his father was a tenor. He recognized the extraordinary musical ability of young Beethoven, appointed him assistant organist, and later gave him leave to visit Vienna and study under Mozart. But when his mother fell ill, Beethoven was unable to go. Maximilian Francis later funded Beethoven's time in Vienna, studying under Haydn, Salieri, and others. In 1794, Bonn was overrun by French revolutionary troops, and Maximilian Francis was forced to flee to Vienna, where he lived the rest of his life. Beethoven planned to dedicate his first symphony to his first patron, but Maximilian Francis died before it was completed at the age of 45. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other royal history videos. If you really want to help, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A link is in the description. Thank you for watching.